So this session will grapple with a thorny question: how to translate scientific data into public policy. The premise in the program is that science on air pollution and health is clear. If only people were truly aware that air pollution is killing them, they would act, no, they would demand that policymakers act to reduce it. If only science were prose instead of science, scientists wouldn't be speaking a different language that makes all of this more difficult. The gap between research, public opinion, and public policy would be bridged, enlightened self-interest would emerge, and blue skies would flourish. But science is messy. It's the language of relative risk, of uncertainty analysis, of causal and suggestive outcomes, and equally challenging, a culture that at times rewards answering one question with 6 more questions that are even more difficult. So perhaps rather than purely communicated uncertain science, maybe it's science fatigue on the part of the public. We've all heard the cynical, everything will kill you, but not today. It's not uncommon, the public reaction from a regular media diet of no cholesterol, no sugar, no smoking, no this, no that. But even when the science is clear, it can still be muddy in its application. Many times over the last 3 days, you've heard that urban air pollution is number 20 on the list of GBD causes of mortality, behind obesity, HIV, waterborne diseases, and many other maladies. Given so many social ills, air pollution is only a relative priority, competing with much more serious issues, so that from time to time, it can be ignored, especially in a developing world where there are many priorities and funds are short. Opposing sides can disagree on the effects of air pollution, quite honestly, or fund science to discredit, another course. It's natural dusts that are the real problem. Or the science isn't from here, it's from the West. It's not relevant. Or it's not my sector's pollution. Sulfates are really protective, they cool the planet. And the data in reality may not be conclusive. So whose science is correct, and how do we decide? Pollution, as you'll hear today, has also been characterized as a sign of economic progress, to be tolerated for the greater good of lifting the economy. And indeed, socioeconomic status is regularly associated with better overall health. So how does one translate even a clear body of science and evidence that air pollution, especially at high levels, causes death and disease, into action in the face of uncertainty in some of the details, or in the face of competing social priorities, or in the face of information obfuscation, strong opposition, or social or governmental indifference? And there's cost. In this session, we'll hear from 2 highly respected advocates about their different clean air campaigns and how they dealt with these issues. The first is Dr. Anthony Headley, former professor of community medicine at the University of Hong Kong and creator of the world-famous Headley Index of air pollution, health impacts, and associated costs. Tony will take a pessimistic view of the ability to turn science into policy based on his work in Hong Kong over some 20 years. Anamita Roychadre is Associate Director with the Center for Science and Environment in India, with responsibility for public awareness campaigns to reduce vehicle pollution. She is our optimist today, as usual, and will present the story of a successful campaign to convert Delhi's buses, taxis, and rickshaws into CNG. Both Tony and Anamita will be interviewed by BBC anchor Rico Hizon, a well-known shaper of public policy, of public information and opinions himself, as host of the Asia Business Report and Asia Today. I'd ask you to welcome our panelists, and Tony, welcome to the microphone.
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Hizon, friends and colleagues. Thank you very much for inviting me here today to try and help address this perplexing problem, which Bob has described, of translating science into effective health protection policies. My only real qualification for being here this afternoon is that I'm a refugee from the Asia-Pacific city with the highest levels of pollution given its GDP per capita. This is a city in which air quality has been a major environmental health research theme for 22 years, but which has increasingly cloaked itself in a shroud of lethal smog for at least 15 of those years. No amount of bad press translating and relaying this message, and effectively degrading Hong Kong as a business and investment center, as a tourist destination, nor attempts at rational, professional, and scientific debate have really made any difference, in my opinion, least of all to the protection of child health. Perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised. Skepticism and denial is very much part of the human condition. We can all quote examples. For example, while today microscopy is a key tool in many different sciences and disciplines, in 1676 of the Common Era, when Mr. van Leeuwenhoek was designing, inventing, and building hundreds of microscopes, he was mocked and ridiculed. He was told that what he could see through these instruments was sheer fantasy. It was no better 175 years later, in the 1850s, when Europe and the United States were being plagued with cholera outbreaks. The authorities in the City of London, as depicted here, rejected theories about a specific waterborne causal agent for the disease and instead employed human smell detectors at the astonishing daily wage of $40 US, a daily fortune 160 years ago. Since then, we'll all agree that we have made some progress, carefully dissecting evidence by employing what we might call the logical templates set out for us by philosophers, scientists, physicians, biostatisticians, like John Stuart Mill, Robert Koch, and Bradford Hill, and you could name many more. One of the manifest benefits of that scrutiny for air quality science are the WHO air quality guidelines, arguably the most rigorous collective synthesis of the cumulative evidence on air pollution health effects to date, although perhaps becoming dated. Among the many criteria for causality documented here in exhaustive detail one of the most important is consistency. But on the right, you will see an astounding parallel example of inconsistency. As the size and the scrutiny of our knowledge base has grown exponentially, so has the loss of daily visibility in Hong Kong. We can show that the daily loss of line of sight out of your window reliably predicts illness and premature death. This is a phenomenon which is spuriously rationalized by the government as possibly due to many unspecified causes other than air pollution. While the WHO report is a benchmark agreed by the World Health Assembly, 184 nations, the Hong Kong government says it needs more evidence on the need for and benefits of mitigation. In 2006, I said that if the same level of harm as arises from pollution came from infectious disease, such as SARS or influenza, the government would not be dragging its feet. If the thousands who die from pollution in Hong Kong were dying of infection, as 299 did from SARS in 2003, then the government response would be fast, ruthless, not intransigent, and disingenuous. So, as environmentalists, we need to focus on this curious cognitive dissonance and try and explain it and penetrate it. Hippocrates is reputed to have said, first, do no harm. This is now a widely accepted public health dictum. It underpins the precautionary principle, which I believe we all subscribe to. But what is an acceptable risk to different people? Of course, the WHO guidelines provide some important steer on that. But Hong Kong's traffic signature air pollutants are several 100% above those guidelines. And yet, in the first stage of a new massive infrastructural development in Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta, including the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, road bridge, we find the government has apparently omitted to commission a health impact assessment. No evidence of the collective science in the guidelines operating here. The only way forward for us to address this was not science and rational debate and risk communication, but rather litigation. The decision on the primacy of public health protection will not be taken by public health specialists, scientists, and managers, but by these gentlemen with the unusual headdress in the Supreme Court of Hong Kong. Whatever the judicial decision they reach, it will be hampered in law, at least from our public health perspective, by the fact that, as reported in the South China Morning Post, our environmental laws do not foster respect for the environment. Our air pollution control ordinance is so obsolete, its only place is in a museum of political history, not as a working tool on which we depend daily for health protection. Whether the judges will be able to confer greater protection on child health than science and its advocacy has done, or rather not done, over 20 years, remains to be seen. I mean, here are a few of many hundreds of headlines attempting to make a difference. In 1994, rising pollution linked to deaths. 1995, air cleanup needed for a healthy future. 2005, polluted fog leaves a city gasping. And 2010, Hong Kong's disconnect in health and air policy. These are written by lay people. This is not a biased, prejudiced, self-interested group of environmental scientists. But now the government has its own translation of the evidence, and its own headline shifts the onus onto the people. It says, now it's up to you. Up to you to switch off lights, turn down the air cons, throw away your necktie, wear light clothing, and take public transport. All necessary, maybe, in themselves, but not as an alternative to the authorities taking definitive action on emissions from power generation, manufacturing, shipping, building better networks of clean mass transportation, and making it mandatory to eliminate the very high prevalence of our pre-Euro and Euro 1 vehicles from our streets, just for a start. This is a failure of risk communication, of environmental governance, and a failure to accept responsibility for those external costs of pollution. They are traded off onto the lungs of children. Well, to drive the process of policy development through the public domain, we need better ways of translation of these pollutant levels into the health effects and into both monetary and quality of life values, so that, indeed, they become part of a way of life, especially for our future change agents, our children. Well, our simple model is called the Headley Index by my colleagues. But in spite of that handicap, you may consider that it has some value as a starting point for a different approach to advocacy. So here we are transported 2,000 miles to the north right now into Hong Kong. This index is available globally. And the first window that you're treated to is a dollar clock. It's in Hong Kong dollars, but this is a cosmopolitan audience, so let's have it in US dollars. And since midnight, the attributable cost of today's air pollution in Hong Kong is 516,000 US and counting. This figure represents the cost of healthcare, lost productivity attributable to pollution-induced illness and death, and you can expand these direct and indirect costs to the intangible costs. That is, willingness to pay by the Hong Kong population to avoid a premature death, to avoid a hospital admission for cardiopulmonary disease, and to avoid a day of bronchitic symptoms such as cough, phlegm, and wheeze. Well, how did we get to these dollar values? Incidentally, this inflates the estimated cost since midnight to 3.4 million US. Well, how did we get to these values? We take a feed from the Environmental Protection Department's 13 general stations and 3 roadside stations. And so here we are, we're looking out over Hong Kong Harbour at the present time. It looks unusually clear, actually, but CCD devices can capture every single photon that's available, so it might be misleading. And I can take you into the urban area. Let's go to Causeway Bay. Here we are. So in Causeway Bay today, the particulate levels are running very high. They have peaked at about 120 micrograms per cubic meter. The levels of NOx are varying between 250 and about 230 micrograms per cubic meter. Incidentally, this is the only site in Hong Kong, the only evidence linked to government pollution monitoring, which will show you the WHO guidelines in comparison to the current levels. The sulfur dioxide levels are hovering around the WHO 24-hour guideline, and it's important to remember that with compliance with that guideline, your levels will be around 5 to 6 micrograms per cubic meter, not 20. In this setting, we don't have any significant elevation of ozone because of the scavenging by the huge amounts of NOx available. But if you go to one of the offshore islands where there is no traffic, then you've got a very high ozone pollution environment. Well, I could walk you through, and I will. I've just lost my 5 minutes. I shall be there. I'm now going to just walk you through the consequences of today's pollution. And we can do that by going to a number of different buttons. Let's go, first of all, to the button which will tell us what the consequences of this are for ambulatory medical care. So since midnight, we estimate that the attributable primary care visits for respiratory disease alone have topped 14,500 in a population of 7 million. As far as more serious acute illness is concerned, we've consumed 140 hospital bed days, mainly for cardiopulmonary disease, again, since midnight. And there have been about 2 attributable deaths so far in the 12 or 13 hours since this particular clock started to run. The system will allow you to explore it. It will give you a number of cumulative totals of pollutants, of bad health outcomes, and of the dollar values associated with that. For example, for PM10, for nitrogen dioxide, and it will relate these to the WHO guidelines. Here's the WHO annual 40 micrograms per cubic meter. So that gives you an immediate vision of what kind of traffic emission signatures we've got and the problem it creates. So as Bob pointed out in his introduction, this is an enormous issue for environmental justice. It is a major driver of social inequity. And my argument is that there is nothing like the level of necessary recognition which is needed for this problem in, as I say, a region with extremely high GDP per capita and a can-do mentality for so many things, particularly for infrastructural projects. So where does this leave us? It remains to be seen how much difference this kind of platform will make. It has been popular. We get 40 to 50,000 hits a month. It's popular with the media, with the public, with the educational sector, but not with the government. You will never hear it mentioned by the minister. His jaw becomes square in shape when this externalization of the cost is mentioned and when the index is exhibited. So as I say, it remains to be seen where this will lead, and there's a lot more to do. This is a very rudimentary tool. We can improve it. I've been asked, as a chronic pessimist, to finish on a positive note. So I'll mention two things. First, I want to mention the example of the efforts of our independent think tank, Civic Exchange, in Hong Kong, which has translated the health risks, in this case, of sulfur fuel emissions, sulfur-rich fuel emissions, to the ship owners, to the shipping companies. As described on Tuesday afternoon by Simon Ng, there is agreement, which will be operationalized on January the 1st, that moored ships in Hong Kong will switch to cleaner fuels. This is a great achievement because SO2 and the related transitional metals are an important cause of mortality. But does it mean that we must think in terms of bypassing government from the public, the NGOs, to the polluters? What are the implications of this for really a comprehensive approach? Second, to finish, I believe that the emerging leadership of the central Chinese government in the field of environmental management and pollution control is undoubtedly the best hope for air quality in Hong Kong, because it's unlikely to come from within in the foreseeable future. There's a lot to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Rico, Tony. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's a Delhi story. Story of all change makers in Delhi who made change possible. And it's an amazing story. And how did this begin? In 1996, this was our invitation card to a public meeting to talk about air pollution. Cough, wheeze, suffocate. And the public meeting was also called, quite provocatively, the public trial, where we had the power that be and the people, about 500 strong audience sitting there, debating, discussing, getting angry about the very polluted air in Delhi then. And why this public meeting? Because we were releasing the findings of a study, and the study again called Slow Murder. Slow Murder, the deadly story of vehicular pollution in India. Now, we may have written a lot about the reasons why vehicular pollution, etc. But look at the way the city, which was desperate for solution from the choking haze of pollution, and it was so hungry for information. Media was immediately attentive, and it picks up the information, says that vehicles are responsible for 64% of pollution in Delhi. And quite interesting, the message they give out is that the report uncovers for the first time the reluctance of the auto industry to make technological changes in order to meet stringent emission standards. This was the beginning of a campaign in Delhi. But this was a campaign which began without a design. And I just cannot discuss this without actually bringing the person who had created CAC then, and in his words, how it began. He just said that it began during the high summer of 1995, when I saw a large number of cars line up in the heat to get their emission levels checked. Even as an environmentalist, I was not aware of all the contours of this highly technical problem of vehicular pollution. But this tailpipery struck me as a little imbecilic. This was not the key policy measure industrialized countries took to reduce air pollution. The reason why I'm saying this, that when Anil called us and said, what's going on there? What's the problem? And we as young researchers, and that was the first lesson for us for civil society action, that if you think something is wrong out there, first go and find out for yourself what's wrong. And that's precisely what we did, and we're still doing that. But more important message, that when you begin to build information in the public domain, you immediately get response. And there are actors out there with responsibility, with power, with authority. And this happened then. So while media was attentive, one of the key players and one of the key change makers in the city, immediately there was the judiciary that steps in. We didn't go to the court. We did not file any PIL. But it is the court which was already listening to an air pollution case in Delhi, immediately responds and says that, hey, and ask the government, what are you doing about this? And that was the beginning of an action planning in the city. But understand that when you're trying to bring change and you have to communicate with people, then the same technical studies that we do to understand and assess what air pollution means to public health, you just have to turn that into simple message. So imagine a day you wake up in the morning, you open your Sunday newspaper, and you see a half-page advertisement with a banner headline saying that 51,000 people dead by breathing. But that was the way to catch attention in a city where no one was discussing air pollution. And then you list all the key players who are responsible for the deaths, all the ministries, automobile industry, the refineries. And then more response, more policy response. The Environment Ministry comes up with a white paper, with an action plan, and then the Supreme Court of India sets up a very powerful body to advise the court on pollution control and monitor. And I'm happy today that Mr. Burilal, who has been steering that process since 1998, is here. And that has been one of the most important driving force behind the change in Delhi. But then you have to build constituency. You need support. And it is a scientific community, the medical community that came forward. It's the Indian Medical Association, the Delhi Medical Association, the key noted doctors, an amazing support that we got from them. And that's a time when they told us that saying that so much microgram per cubic meter of pollution makes no sense to people. Just show them these lung pictures. And that's what they gave us from their open heart surgery. Just by looking at the color of the lung, they said we can tell whether the person is from Delhi or outside. The black patches you see on the lung is because you've lived in a city which is so polluted that that's what you really see, and that's the color of your lung. And that was an amazing response that we got. But that was a time when the Delhi was in for an election. And therefore, you have to look at another set of change makers, the politician. And the resistance was already building up, the political apathy and the way they would ignore the problem, and it just got us so much angry. And then, even more so, because the health minister of Delhi around that time just said that all the particulate matter that you see in Delhi's air, it's all natural dust from the Rajasthan desert. Therefore, what did we do? We took out a clean air pledge. And we took it to all the prospective candidates who were going to fight the elections and said, are you prepared to sign on this clean air pledge? And some of them did. Fortunately, even the current chief minister of Delhi has signed the pledge. And therefore, on the eve of the election, again, this half-page ad, which released the names of the candidates who had signed the pledge. And we said, if you want our votes, give us clean air. And that was a time when we really had to catch the imagination of Delhi. This was the auto exhibition, the auto show in Delhi, and we put up our posters there. And this is our chief minister of Delhi, who is still the chief minister of Delhi. She was brought there, and her lung was tested. But it was just the political inertia was so much that it was very difficult to move the system then. And more public campaign happened. So there was more messages out there in the public domain to say, that roll down the window of your bulletproof car, Mr. Prime Minister. The security threat is not the gun, it's the air of Delhi. And with that message, we gave out the phone number of the Prime Minister asking people to lodge their complaint. But by the evening, when the Prime Minister's office was swamped with calls, they began to divert the call back to us for action. Well, that was a statement. But because of the judicial intervention, and you need to understand there has been so much criticism that whether the judiciary was prescriptive, trying to force things down, but we just understand that all the recommendations that came to the judiciary, it is not one judge sitting there taking decision. The recommendations were based on a consultative process. And the CNG order, and which is today so famous in Delhi and the rest of the world, was based on a similar consultation process where it's the Delhi government that said that we are going to do it, and they had given a timeline for doing that. All that the court did was to hold them responsible for it. They turned that recommendation into a directive. But after the CNG order, and the CNG order came in 1998, and it was to be implemented by 2001. But after that, all hell broke loose. And the reason? Here the buses who were driving on very poor quality diesel, they were asked to move to natural gas to protect public health. But at the same time, it is the car industry which had begun to dieselize. And the question was that the dirty diesel with sulfur content as high as 2,500 ppm, that why should you therefore allow luxury consumption of such poor diesel? And therefore we call the diesel cars the engines of the devil, and we wanted them to go. But what's interesting is not that what only us doing, it's the way the whole public debate had begun to evolve around that time. And to think that around 1999, that the Indian media would then be reporting on the discussion, even in California, on diesel risks. And that is the kind of reportage that was happening around that time. And when they were saying, and they were actually targeted the automobile industry, saying that well aware that tiny particles from diesel exhaust kill thousands in Indian cities, MNCs are bent upon introducing diesel vehicles. And that's how the battle ensured. But just understand that when civil society fight their battle, and it's the science which is supposed to drive the decision. And that's what we try to do, that bring in as much science into it. And the science of particulate pollution was defining the action in Delhi then. But the battle that you fight is when the science itself becomes the victim of lobbying, of misinformation. This is an affidavit from a major automobile manufacturer in the Supreme Court of India. And it is actually attacking the science of WHO on particulate pollution, essentially saying that the threshold of the onset of the health effects has not yet, essentially they are contesting the fact of the WHO that there is no safe level for particulate pollution. And what was our role then? That immediately, therefore, you have to arm yourself with science and information. You have to mobilize the scientific network. And we took that affidavit to a WHO expert and said, please give us clarification. And this is the clarification we got. This interpretation is certainly not correct. Effects occur at any concentration. And I'm sure your guess is right. The WHO expert is Dieter Schweller. Now, when we got this clarification, we took that to the court. And it's important to tell you that this diesel campaign that had started then, and this had helped Delhi, and that's when we got the court order, to advance enforcement of Euro 2 emission standards in 2000, which means we were able to advance the decision by at least 5 years. And that's where the Delhi made the big gain. But the moment Delhi got Euro 2 emission standards, now the CNG order itself became a target of opposition, because everyone tried to say that now if Euro 2 diesel is available and that's clean diesel, then you should not insist on CNG. But clearly this was not acceptable, because the Supreme Court has said it very clearly that you move the bus fleet either to CNG or to any other clean fuel. And in that, they had defined clean fuel in various ways. And one of them was clean diesel, which was defined as 10 ppm sulfur diesel that is used along with advanced particulate traps. Now, therefore, the choice was clear that either you do CNG or you bring clean diesel, but clean diesel was not available in Delhi. Now, this is the cartoon we did, that where the petroleum minister spraying Euro 2 diesel on Supreme Court and saying, this is clean, my lord. But that essentially that was happening with now the government had stepped in also to fight the CNG decision. All the misinformation happened. But understand that what, again, this means to that how do you fight your battle with science? And this is what we had to do all the research and also understand the importance of a forum like this where we are right now. That many of you here sitting with us, and some of you have been involved with us right from the beginning, during the 90s. Here we have, all along the way, you have helped how we have sourced information from the entire global network to fight our battles. So since the 1999, if we have, say, Michael and Axel, and all along the way, Connie, Jitu, Bob, Dan, and I can just, so many of you around that you have helped. But this is the importance of developing a network of scientists and the experts who will help you with science and information to fight your battle. But by this time, one of the key change makers, the media, so far they were the passive observer, just reporting on the development. But now the media itself becomes an active change maker. And from the alert and informed role, now they are beginning to build pressure. And an amazing the stories were being carried in the media then. I'll just give you one example from the Indian Express, one newspaper in Delhi. When the deadline for CNG approached, they did this CNG Rogues Gallery. And on a daily basis, they report on the transport minister, the transport commissioner, the special commissioner, the joint secretary of urban development, saying what each one of them have done daily. Have they done anything to move towards in meeting the deadline? Just imagine the kind of pressure that it was building on the power, on the government to act. And so these were the headlines that they carried on their own. So if your heart bleeds to see this because of the whole mismanagement of the CNG implementation, then these are the ones with blood on the hands. Now, which means that they were going beyond just not making the institutions work, but fixing personal responsibility for action. Finally, the Supreme Court, which was, there was so much pressure to dilute the court order, but Supreme Court refused to extend the deadline. And the verdict of April 5, 2002 was the most decisive, and that really kind of helped Delhi to implement the CNG program. And by December 2002, Delhi said bye-bye to the last diesel bus, and this was implemented. The message here, therefore, is that Delhi, during the first part of this decade, was so desperate to get some relief from the choking haze of pollution during that time. It really needed immediate measures, which we call today the first generation action. And you will see a lot of commonality in this action in other cities of India and in other cities of South Asia, where this kind of action had been taken. And with that, we have seen the difference. We have seen the pollution levels stabilizing somewhat. People are saying, not with the data, but that we can now see stars in Delhi sky. And that is the observation that we have seen, that the people acknowledged. But most important change that we have seen with this success, that if you see success, then there will also be a turnaround in the political attitude. And therefore, when the next election happened in Delhi in 2004, one of the plank on the basis of which the political parties were fighting with each other, that was the clean air. And they're fighting with each other to take credit for CNG program, to take credit for the cleaner air in Delhi. And that is an enormous gain in terms of the political will and the political attitude that happened, the change that we have seen in Delhi. When we look back and when we say that, well, fighting the CNG battle was so difficult, But now when we look forward, and we look forward to the second generation action that is needed to deal with the problem of air pollution, public health, climate, energy security, and all this menu of action that now we'll have to face, just not the little incremental changes in technology, but leapfrog our technology to scale up our public transport options, to improve our mobility, the way we travel in our cities, all the big solutions that we now have to go for. Now, this is where we say that this one is going to be far more difficult, and we're already seeing the signs of it. If we want to improve now, that we are asking the government to leapfrog technology, we're seeing the way resistance is once again building up. The refineries, the industry, the turning around, and again trying to play down the role of the vehicles, saying, oh, vehicles are not that big part of the problem, so don't touch them so harshly. At the same time, it's just not the technology issue. Now the whole paradigm shift that we want to see in the way people travel, when we say that when you design your roads, you have to allocate more space to more sustainable way of travel, to walking, to cycling, to bus. But then we have seen that if any one of you have been following the way the whole controversy erupted in Delhi when Delhi was going to implement the bus rapid transit system. But here, the same media, which worked wonders during the CNG campaign, but one of the reasons why the BRT system nearly collapsed in Delhi was also very negative media reports. Now, this is the kind of reporting that was happening when the BRT had started in Delhi. And someone, the media actually screaming and saying that BRT is a weapon of mass dementia. This is the kind of lines that were coming out. And what is amazing, and this is the most important message of any campaign, the campaign is about making a connection between the problem and the solution. But the same media did not make that connection. Here, at one level, they were reporting congestion, the cost of congestion, the traffic jams. But the other side, they were also condemning the rapid transit system. But it is not a unified position of the media. Media was only reflecting the divided society in Delhi. So if in one part the media was reporting the negativity of the BRT, on the other side we have also seen positive stories on BRT in media. And most important is that when the editorial saying that we certainly need more BRT corridors in the capital, and it acknowledged the fact that the current chief minister won the election all and got the maximum votes all along the BRT corridor. That was an observation in the media reports. NDTV polls that brought out the majority support of the BRT project. Now that is where the hope lies. This essentially shows that the opinion building is a very important part of the change, and the change makers will have to work with the opinion builders to essentially convey the right messages. But the second generation challenge is not going to be so easy, because now the bad guy is just not the industry. The bad guy is also the car owner, the target of the campaign. And this is going to be far more difficult battle to win when you have to touch people's car. You have to tell them that you have to pay more for parking. This time, when we did a campaign to increase the parking charges in Delhi, the traffic police commissioner turned around and said, but where will the poor car owners go? Now, where the poor car owners are essentially your new impediment, they are blocking the way. But we don't lose hope. Now we are essentially beginning to see this kind of voices, and now people are taking and they're protesting to protect their pavements, to protect their right to walk. And this, the new understanding, the deepening of this understanding is the new asset for change and the campaign. And finally, it is the belief there are problems. There are really going to be a lot of resistance to all the change that we are asking for, the society is asking for. But this change is possible. The CNG success has convinced us that it is important, it's possible to change. And we are also more hopeful today because we feel that after this whole decade of action that has happened in Delhi, the city has gained more political and policy maturity. And the way we used to lock horns with the power, the government, and everyone else, and during the early part of our campaign, we don't have to do that anymore, because suddenly there's a lot of change in the attitude already in the government system. There is much more engagement today, more knowledge, the city is more open to ideas, and this is the dividend of the decade-old action and opportunity for the city. And this action of the past, the success of the past, gives us the confidence of the future. Because we understand that the second generation action needs support. It needs very strong political and public support. And this must not be allowed to fail. Because if this fails, then what? And certainly we don't want to see our cities like this. Thank you very much.
And that, I think, is the most important thing. We cannot fail. Anthony, Anumita, thank you so much for your wonderful presentations. I am really intrigued that to be able to move forward with clean air policies, you have to bring this to court. You have to be alienated by the government because of an index which basically adds up all the numbers of the lives lost, the people who have to be brought to hospitals, the deaths, the loss of productivity. And I would like to thank, first and foremost, the Clean Air Initiative for Asian Cities for inviting me over here to moderate this very important event. Because when they spoke to me several months ago, I said, yes, I also do have a stake in this Clean Air Initiative because I am also directly involved. My wife and my son are asthmatic. I buy hundreds of dollars worth of steroids, inhalers, and nebulizers almost like every 3 to 6 months. So I said I have to be part of this discussion. And now I believe I want to also become a clean air advocate and tell the whole world that we really have to clean our air, especially here in Asian cities. Of course, you know, Anumita was very positive about the initiatives being implemented in New Delhi. But I read a recent report, Anumita, that despite your initiatives, despite fighting tooth and nail to push forward with these clean air policies, New Delhi is still one of the most polluted cities in Asia. So what's happening here? Isn't the message getting across to politicians, to the people? Isn't public opinion there that we should really support clean air measures?
Absolutely. It's very important for us to understand, and this is a very important message that must go out immediately, that doing one CNG is not that's going to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. But having done that, it's only given us the confidence that it's possible to make change happen. But we have also seen that if we don't keep the momentum going, if the action begins and ends and you lose it somewhere on the way, then the problem is growing more rapidly and faster than your ability to solve the problem.
Anumita, could it also be that politicians and policymakers cannot understand this scientific data? Because as we all know, a lot of parliamentarians or members of or congressmen or senators come from different levels of education. It might be too scientific, the jargon, just like myself. I report on business and financial news every day. And when I was told that the Federal Reserve implemented the so-called QE2, I said, is that the Queen Elizabeth II? I said, no, that's a quantitative easing. So what does it really mean? Just printing more money. Do politicians really understand what this is all about? What you're fighting for?
Politicians, well, it is not right to say they don't understand. Politicians will have to be informed, they need to be educated, and we also have to play our role very well to communicate. But we have understood that the politicians, they respond to the balance of power. They do not, or they ignore the science, they ignore the influence of the industry, and the invested interest is stronger than the power of the opinion makers and the power of the people. But the moment you see the public opinion evolving and the public opinion getting stronger, politicians respond to that as well. Therefore, it is important to make the democracy come into play where each and every actor plays their role very strongly. And that's what we call the dance of the democracy in Delhi today.
Well, India is the largest democracy in the world. What can you say about that, Anthony? I think what we really need here is political will and money, funding, and the information drive. I love Anthony's Headley Index. I was taking a look at it this morning, and I was shocked by all of those numbers being added up, not only every minute, but every second. So just like, I would also like to mention about the Clean Air Scorecard of the Clean Air Initiative for Asian Cities. I think this is media sexy, as they say. This is what the media wants to read. This is what the media wants to hear about, these kinds of indices. So do you think that we should also be implementing this kind of index, this kind of Headley Index, not only for Hong Kong, but Asia-wide?
Well, certainly we need to look at ways of making the whole process of environmental management more transparent. And I think one of the problems with air quality is that the pollutants cause a largely silent injury. And although loss of visibility, I think, is a very important parameter, and it's one that we need to exploit more. Otherwise, I mean, people can't see the damage that's being done to the lining of the arteries and the lungs when they inhale the next lungful of polluted air. Some have some irritation and so on, but they don't see and they can't project the future problem for their arterial, heart and lung health, and actually every organ in the body. So,
is it because also data is not also readily available in other Asian countries?
That's also a rate limiting factor, and it's why organizations like the Health Effects Institute have been sponsoring risk assessment studies across Asia. You're absolutely right. We need much better intelligence, as it were, from ground-based studies in these localities, because there are all kinds of problems in using overseas data. I mean, some real problems, and certainly that they don't cross cultural boundaries very easily. So yes, we need more investment in this area from the point of good quality research, capacity building amongst young people who can take this forward in the foreseeable future.
I'm just really wondering, Anthony, since the financial crisis, we've seen a lot of governments implementing so-called stimulus measures, hundreds of billions of US dollars. I wonder how much of that has been put into clean air policies. Well, most of them have basically been put into the pockets of a lot of consumers to buy cars, you know, basically pollutants, basically, who are not helping the environment.
Yes, well, this could be another example of cognitive dissonance and, you know, driving consumerism may not, unless, you know, we have the right kind of regulations and product manufacturing regulations. It may not be the best way to contain emissions, as you say, but not even a tiny fraction of 1% of this largesse will be going into environmental health research, I'm quite sure. I mean, in Hong Kong, a very wealthy region, these resources are desperately difficult to get hold of. If we hadn't been supported by organizations like HEI over the last few years, we would have been in serious trouble as a research outfit.
And I think a clean air index or clean air data should also be part of one of the more important reports that should also be disseminated, particularly to the media. I think it's really important that we get this data out, these kinds of reports out into the wider media, not only for the likes of BBC World News and other media organizations, because all that we get to report on a daily basis or on a weekly basis are the likes of industrial production, automotive sales, retail sales. I think what's really important is that we have to really inform the people what's happening with our environment.
Add to the question that you just asked with regard to the recession and the stimulus package, I think it's a very important message that we must give out from India, that when the rest of the world was giving stimulus to the car industry, India decided to give stimulus to the bus industry. So they said that the cities, we are going to give you money to buy buses, and they used that as a lever to ask the city governments to also undertake some mandatory reform that will promote sustainable transportation. And I think that's a very important message that India has given out. At the same time, as regards to the informing people about air quality, to make people aware, sensitize, and build pressure, and this time in Delhi, the Commonwealth Games gave us a very good opportunity. For the Commonwealth Games, at least for the athletes, they set up a system to forecast air pollution, use index to inform people about air pollution. Now, what we are saying that we have done, if you have done this for the athletes during the games, make it a permanent system so that the people of Delhi can benefit from this. So I think that the systems are evolving, but we have to keep the pressure up so that, there's no let off.
But is the information campaign sufficient? Do people really know of what's happening with the air that's around them?
I'll give a very interesting example. When we had started doing our campaign, once we were wanting to do a campaign ad in the newspaper, and that cost a lot of money. And what we did, and because it was an election campaign, we said the people of Delhi wanted to pay small donations to give the cost, to cover the cost of that ad. And amazing response we found that the people who came out, they donated. But that was a time when a little girl, a 12-year-old girl who called up and said that my father, who is an asthmatic, and every time he goes out and I see what a bad condition he's in, and I want to contribute, will you take my pocket money? Now, understand here is a person, they don't have to look at the data, but they just, by the sniffing that air, by getting affected by that air, they know there's a problem. And there's this palpable response, but there's somewhere along the line, we have to go there with a positive agenda to mobilize their support to push for action.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like Hong Kong and China, particularly the mainland, are heavily investing in clean air.
Well, there's a long way to go, but as I said in my one of two slightly optimistic notes, I believe the central government will recognize that the long-term effects of damage to population health, to the growing workforce, to the young workforce, is totally counterproductive. They have realized that in the case of tobacco. The example I give is that they've recognized that even if there's no more smoking from today in China, that 100 million young males will die of tobacco-induced disease. That's very bad news for a country that wants a sustainable economy. So, yes, I'm hopeful in that respect. May I come back to you about the media?
Yes.
I mean, we need the media, but, over the last 20 years, I confess to have been frustrated in dealing with journalists, reporters, in the print media, the electronic media, radio, TV, because they often get it wrong. And
because it's just too scientific.
well, what's the...
It has to be, that jargon has to be broken down into simple terms.
No, even
like I myself, I came from CNBC, and I would report on stocks, on bonds, on treasury bills. But now that I'm at the BBC, I really have to break down all of these terms. And when my guest gives me a very business jargony term, I have to break it down and try to explain it to my viewer. I think that's the most important thing. That's why I like your Headley Index. I like the Clean Air Scorecard. And these are basically the types of, how would I say, measures or initiatives that the media likes to pounce on because they're easy to understand and simple.
One of the challenges, I think, is that arguably, as difficult as this is an easy time for Asia. Air pollution is very high. The effects are very clear. As things improve, effects are going to need to be measured at lower and lower levels. So a big part of the scorecard is moving away from like the dirtiest city to being able to endorse the building of an environmental infrastructure with monitors, with capabilities, with the ability to conduct studies and have an evidence base. So as the air gets cleaner, the answers are there. And so that's a long-term sustainable capability that needs to be put in Asia so that these questions can be answered on an ongoing basis.
But how committed are governments in putting money, in funding these kinds of programs? Is the money there? See, you come up with budgets, trillions of dollars every year, but is a big chunk of the budget allocated to clean air initiatives?
Well, on other continents, I mean, there's evidence emerging, I mean, increasing of oversight. I mean, in the States, Bob will correct me, but in the States, if a state doesn't meet, doesn't comply with air quality standards, then they will lose federal funding, for example, for the maintenance of highways. In Europe, the EU has oversight over countries which are not full members of the economic community, like the UK, and is threatening the UK with a €300 million fine for having dirty air in London and the surrounding districts. Now, in a place like Hong Kong and other Asian centres, there's no oversight. There are no financial penalties. The polluter does not pay, and somehow we need to take that forward. Maybe, you know, that's something to
I think, Anumita, Anthony, and Rob, for a lot of policymakers, when you talk about new initiatives, they think, oh my goodness, we're going to spend hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. But I think you have to educate policymakers with is basically what would be the savings for the economy in the medium to long term. How much will the country be able to save with these clean air initiatives? And how much it would, what is it cost effective? Yeah. What will be the savings for the economy? How will this increase the gross domestic product or the gross national product?
My problem in Hong Kong is that we simply cannot get away from the perspective of cash at the point of sale, and the vested interest calling the minister and saying, don't shave a cent of my profits, and that's final. So you're absolutely right, but how do we implement those cost-benefit ratios?
Yes.
How do we translate those?
You need initial funding, you need the money.
I mean, if this is simply naked greed, then it's not possible. There may be another way, but I've got serious doubt. Sorry to be pessimistic again.
There is another no, but there is another side of that growth.
Yes.
Look at India today. It's aspiring to become the auto hub of Asia now. Okay, there's a huge investment that is happening, just not the Indian car makers, but the car makers from outside the country who are coming in. And there's so much of public policy, public funding, public subsidy getting tied with that objective, that aspiration. Now, there's a role of a regulation. Now, here's an investment happening. It's a new investment. Now, you need to link that investment with the best possible roadmap. You have to influence that roadmap so that you can maximize your environmental and public health gains from that investment. Now, that's why when the auto industry or the government, they wag the cost and just saying that, oh, if we have to meet the new norms or the more tighter emission standards, that, you know, it's just going to affect our profitability. Now, we certainly must be able to use the kind of information that Bob has just said about the health costs, and to say that what is ultimately cost to the nation. And therefore, I think, sensitizing policymakers of the importance and the significance of setting very clear, transparent, stringent roadmap for investment is another way of mobilizing financial resources for public good.
But how committed is the new administration?
As I said, it's a question of that who is stronger in influencing the government, industry or people. Now,
and at the moment, who is more influential?
Industry certainly tilts the balance quite often.
Like the Ambani brothers.
Right. But then, as we have seen through our small successes, that people can also tilt the balance. And that's where we really have to move. We need the science, the power of information, communication. We have to build constituency for this kind of issues to be able to influence public policy and the politicians. And we've seen the change in the political attitude already. The language of our policies are beginning to change already. Now, there is a response, so it's not that everything is lost. So it is that on that positive note that there are still massive barriers still, but we still have to fight on, and there's a way, and this is the change that we need to leverage now.
So, Anumita, we're going to see then Delhi in the top 5 of the Clean Air Scorecard. Very soon, maybe in the next one, because what was just released recently was a pilot, right? It's the pilot program. Are we going to see it part of the top 5 very soon?
I would always like to believe that.
Rob, I just wanted to ask you, because you have the Headley Index, right? It's mind-boggling. It really opens a lot of eyes. It gives you it really opens everyone's eyes on what is transpiring in Hong Kong in terms of in terms of the pollution levels and its impact on the people and on business. Can't the Clean Air Scorecard adopt this kind of index?
I think there are different uses for different tools. The Clean Air Scorecard, I think, is really, as I tried to allude to, evolved a little bit away from the demonizing tool. It's useful in terms of pointing out areas where air pollution is high, because that can stimulate action. But part of the problem is that there are many cities, China, many parts of the world, frankly, that don't have adequate monitoring, who don't even appear on the radar. So the cities who have taken good steps to put in place a monitoring system to generate the data end up being demonized, and that's not always fair. So there's been a bit of a, thank you, a bit of a change in the nature of the scorecard to a teaching tool, and I think that's useful as well.
Would you like to add something, Anthony?
Well, certainly I think the more we can externalize the effects of the environment on people's health, not only current health, but also the transgenerational health, then I think that this is going to motivate both the public and the legislators. One of the questions that was mooted before this session was, are we going to somehow undermine the science if we have populist policy agendas? I don't think that's the case. I mean, in Hong Kong anyway. If the public was allowed to lead on environmental and public health issues, we would have made much faster progress on tobacco control, on food labelling, and certainly on air quality management. So the rate limiting factor has been the lack of confidence and uncertainty on the part of the government and the legislators, and the vested interest represented in the legislature, and the overly influencing of these policies by the vested interests, the developers and the cross-border business, local and foreign business interests. So there's a huge imbalance here. I mean, it's associated with an increasing gap between, in income between the haves and the have-nots. That is growing in a region which has got a very high GDP per capita. So there is something from what was a very successful economic environment here, with a can-do mentality. There is something here which is emerging which is quite antithetical to environmental management and current and future public health. And whether, you know, scorecards and indexes and tools like that will make a big enough difference, I don't know. I think that's the way we have to go. And as Bob says, there are different purposes, different uses for different tools. But I think we've got a lot of work to do there to calibrate them and target them in the right way.
Ramita?
What was the question?
Basically, reaction to what Anthony just said.
If I can just say that if you really look at what we really need to do now, you know, and I'll just take from there the fact that what we see is going to be the biggest barrier now is targeting our action in a way that is going to provoke the right response from the government. Now, so far, and that's where the big problem is, that we were kind of looking at the government, the industry, the refineries as our biggest target of action so far. But now, the barrier going to be the people themselves. Because what you are really fighting today in India and the growing economy of Asia is the aspiration. It is the people like you, I, and everyone else who wants to own a car, wants to own many cars, drive them as much as they want. Now, this is where how do you galvanize a system to be able to fight that aspiration? And they become the biggest impediment to change. And so therefore, awareness building is just not for the government, just not for the industry, but it's for the people as well. Also to say that they are also harming the environment.
I think it's also important here in Asia, when you are pushing forward an initiative, is that people always want to look at an icon, at an individual, a celebrity that they could really look up to. I mean, I think that is quite common here in Asia. Do you think that this could also be one factor that could push forward these measures? That you have, that the Clean Air Initiative has an icon, a celebrity to represent this whole program and basically promote it around the region?
Absolutely. I think the champion, and we're always looking for champions.
A champion for clean air.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen that everywhere the institutions respond when you have the champions there who believe in the success, who have a vision. And that's a very important catalyst, and that certainly brings about a change. But then we really want to broad base the whole concept of championship, and that we need many, many champions at different levels across the society in all institutions. And how do we build those champions? How that must happen is really going to be a big challenge. But I feel that when people are going through the crisis and people respond so well to the crisis, and the champions emerge, they evolve. But that's where we really need to nurture the champions to be able to push forward.
You are a champion. Are we also seeing others following your lead?
I think we are really looking for the leader and the led.
Mm-hmm.
You may have a leader and a laggard, but it's important to put the vision out, put the idea out. And you will find that it's an atom bomb that ticks away. And if there's a good idea, good vision given out, you will see the public opinion galvanizing, mobilizing, and responding to that, and the change will happen.
Yes, well, we certainly need champions, and it helps if they're celebrities. But I think the best place for them is in the legislature. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't got that, then you're going to be treading water. There are only three things that really, in the end of the day, matter in air quality management. And that's legislation, legislation,
legislation.
And the rest is chat.
That's hard.
You could add enforcement if you like.
Mm.
But if you haven't got them in the legislature, you're done for. And that is the case in Hong Kong at the present time. We had champions who were celebrities when we were fighting tobacco, and that made a huge difference. And the law went through by one vote. It was that important. So yes, champions who may be celebrities, but champions who know their business. And
we also need champions in the legislature.
Indeed.
I think we need to sort of draw our session to a close. I want to first thank Rico for taking on behalf of CAI-Asia.
Thank you very much.
Taking time.
I just wanted to say one thing, Rob. I was invited recently, just about 48 hours ago, to moderate the meeting of President Clinton in Manila. But I got this call from Rob and the rest of the Clean Air Initiative group to moderate this several months ago. I said, I have a commitment. That's why I am here with you today. And my commitment is for clean air in Asia. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and I did want to also thank Tony and Anamita, not only for your presentations, but for putting yourself on the line, for the questions where you never knew where they were going to come from, and for your commitment.